U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken has said now is the time for Israel to end its war in Gaza. Speaking before flying on to Saudi Arabia after talks in Tel Aviv, he said Israel had achieved most of its strategic objectives in dismantling the militant group Hamas. He noted that Israel had made some progress on getting more aid into Gaza, but that more must be done. Secretary Blinken also said Gaza's future governance was being looked at. He said the U.S. rejected calls from some far-right Israeli politicians to reoccupy parts of Gaza.
Just a few miles from the raging war in Gaza, families are setting up their tents and sukkahs for the Jewish festival of Sukkot. But the reason for their gathering isn't purely religious. These are ultra-nationalist Israelis who want to resettle the Gaza Strip. They have come here to discuss and train for the occupation of Palestinian territory. Normally this would be a closed military zone and they wouldn't be allowed here, but the Israeli army and police are securing the event.
Today, we're preparing for the settlement of Gaza, in preparation for turning Gaza into a Jewish city. And today, we are here to organize, to see what it's like on the ground, what it's like to build, what it's like to build new houses.
After the 7th of October, we feel all of us to come and to go to Gaza, because Gaza is our country. 19 years was not, but it's our country.
Israel removed its settlements in Gaza in 2005. Many say that this was a mistake and are pushing to resettle, including members of the current government. Not only ministers and Knesset members from far-right parties, but also Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's Likud party. Although Netanyahu himself has denied there are any plans to resettle Gaza.
Historically, this place belongs to us, and what is the most important thing is that the tragedy, the catastrophe of the October 7 occurred because we didn't control the area, we didn't control these territories, and these territories are essential for our security.
In Gaza, the situation could not be more desperate. Since the war began, at least 90% of its 2.2 million residents have been forcibly displaced. Much of the civilian infrastructure has been bombed to the ground, and more than 42,000 Palestinians have been killed, according to Gaza's health ministry. But not everybody wants to resettle Gaza. This small group of Israelis has come out to protest against the settlers' plans. Some live close by. They're worried that if Gaza is resettled, the war will never end and the hostages will never return.
We believe that their ideology are very risky and dangerous for Israel, for the survival of Israel. And what we are saying is that we want to get separated from the Palestinians, not to get involved in them, in their population. When we've been there, and I've been there as a soldier, it wasn't good. It led only for more death and more hate.
But these concerns fall on deaf ears among settlers. And while they pray for new life across the border, Palestinians in Gaza struggle to survive.
And DW's Emily Gordine, who filed that report, joins us now from Jerusalem. Emily, tell us more about the Israeli government's policy towards settling Gaza. Members of the cabinet support it, don't they?
That's very true. From the government, there is no official policy to resettle Gaza, but among the participants of this conference were a lot of ministers who make up this government, such as, for example, the National Security Minister, Itamar Ben-Gvir. He said in the past that he would be happy to settle in Gaza, but also Finance Minister Bezalel Smotrich, who said that, quote, Gaza was part of the land of Israel and that, quote, without settlements, there is no security. But we also saw social equality Equality Minister May Golan from the Likud party, which is the party of Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. And she came out saying that taking territory from the Palestinians was, quote, what hurts them the most. And this is something that was also echoed by Daniela Weiss, who leads the settler movement that organized this conference in particular. And she has said that in the wake of October 7, the attacks by Hamas, the Gazans had basically lost their right to still live in the territory. Now, of course, these are quite radical ideas. If you look at international law, settlements in the West Bank, but also in Gaza, violate international law, and it's getting Israelis who oppose these settlements quite worried.
What about the broader Israeli public, Emily? Do they support the idea of creating Israeli settlements inside Gaza again?
Well, polls that were conducted earlier this year showed that a bit under a quarter of Israelis support these settlements in Gaza, or the idea of resettling in Gaza. But recent polls also show that over 50%, just over 50% of Israelis want the war to end. They want to see an end to the fighting. They want to see the hostages return. So you're seeing essentially that the Israeli society, again, is quite divided over the issue of what should happen in Gaza. And we also saw that play out at the conference, where a small group of protesters were demonstrating against the plans to resettle in Gaza because they say this endangers the lives of the hostages. If this war continues and settlements grow in Gaza, then the hostages will never return. Essentially what the protesters also told me on that day, I mean, the clashes between these two sides, we saw them in the way that they weren't physical, but they were verbally, and you could really see that they were not finding any common ground with each other. And protesters certainly told me that they are very worried that these radical ideas will become so mainstream and normalized that essentially the hostages will not return, but also that it will provide a security threat to Israel itself in the future.
Emily, thank you very much. That was our correspondent, Emily Gordine, in Jerusalem.
I'm joined now by Daniel Gerlach. He is a Middle East analyst and editor-in-chief of Zenith magazine. Daniel, it's good to see you again. The movement to resettle Gaza, is this just a fringe group of extremists, or do they have significant support in the Israeli government and in Israeli society?
I think they do have significant support in the Israeli government, of course, because two of the champions of the settlers movement and also those who advocate the resettlement of the Gaza Strip or of parts of the Gaza Strip are two of the most important ministers in the cabinet of Mr. Netanyahu. There's Itamar Ben-Gvir and Bezalel Smotrich. Both of them are started as fringe, let's say, politicians, but they have a significant constituency in Israel. And though I don't think that the majority of Israelis think it's a good idea to move back into the Gaza Strip, Israel had evacuated some of the settlements or its settlements in the Gaza Strip when Israel left Gaza, but though not the majority of Israelis support this idea, I think we see how extremists have very successfully pushed through their agendas in various parts of Israeli politics, and settlement is one of them. And let's not forget, especially Bezalel Smotrich, the finance minister and also minister who owns a portfolio of control over the civil administration of the West Bank, has made the argument of security now in order to convince some of his, let's say, colleagues in the cabinet. He said, the resettlement of Gaza is not an ideological question. It's not because we think that it's part of Eretz Yisrael. He said very clearly that it's a matter of security. So demographic engineering, demographic changing in the region in order to strengthen the security of the state of Israel, that's his new argument. And I'm afraid that some in the Israeli government and also in the Israeli public might buy into that.
Yeah, I want to pick up on that, Daniel. There are members of the Israeli government saying publicly that Palestinians lost their right to live in Gaza on October 7th of last year, October 7th being when the Hamas terror attacks took place. In effect, they're laying collective guilt on all Palestinians for what Hamas orchestrated. What kind of reaction in the Middle East and internationally have you observed as a result of that?
Look, I think if it wasn't so sad, it's in a way ironic. Let's say up to 30, 40 years ago, many of the Arab governments, Arab regimes, they promoted this idea of an expansive, aggressive, belligerent, and certainly expanding state of Israel for propaganda reasons. They said Israel will never stop unless until it has conquered the territories of its neighboring countries. And that was, of course, a propaganda argument, because at the one hand, the Arabs were hostile to Israel, but they understood that Israel is pursuing a certain security policy and it lays claim to the whole of Palestine, but not beyond that. Now, with this very aggressive posture and this talk about resettlement, I think many in the region, and that includes the governments, but also the people in the Arab states, is that they are not so sure anymore about let's say the propaganda images that they have promoted 40 years ago are becoming to a certain extent reality. When you see Israeli cabinet ministers also advocating, by the way, the settlement of parts of Lebanon, then you can ask yourself, to what extent is that just warmongering propaganda, or is that really a political plan? Now, I think the majority of Israelis do not want that. But again, it's because we have a significant minority that has pushing political agendas, and because Benjamin Netanyahu needs these associates in the government for the moment, he's also willing, and he shows that he's willing to give into their claims, and that makes it distracts the situation a bit away from the most important settlement issue, which is the West Bank, which is Jerusalem and the Palestinian occupied territories in the West Bank. This is, I think, the most pressing point. But yeah.
What about the legalities of this, though, Daniel? I mean, according to international law, all settlements, whether in the West Bank or in the Gaza Strip, are considered illegal, right?
Of course, according to international law, and that's also the position of the United States, of European EU members, of Germany. Now, let's not forget that Donald Trump had recognized Jerusalem as the capital of Israel, also occupied Jerusalem, East Jerusalem, and has also transferred the embassy there. He has also recognized Israeli sovereignty over the Golan Heights, if not legally, so at least politically. But yes, the expansion of the settlements in all Palestinian territories are illegal according to international law. And what is also interesting is that many in the international arena, in particular in the West, think that this is just like some sort of a sideshow of the Palestine question, of the actual conflict that this is about. And they believe that these issues can be easily solved. But of course, the Israeli government and the ever more stronger settlers movement, which is represented in the Israeli government, is creating facts, is creating fait accompli. That's, by the way, not, and we should be fair about that, that's not only Netanyahu's responsibility. The previous government, which was the anti-Netanyahu coalition of Naftali Bennett, was very much also engaged in expansion of settlements in the West Bank.
Middle East analyst Daniel Gerlach. As always, Daniel, we appreciate your time and your insights. Thank you.